All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another webinar on this fine summer evening from Firearms Legal Protection. So I'm sure some of you guys have joined in our webinar series before. Maybe some of you are brand new to this. So in general, it's a really casual environment here. I'm sure a lot of our members have seen this kind of stuff before, but we have a few topics laid out that we want to talk about tonight. So fortunately tonight, we have the perspectives of both a police officer and an attorney. And so we're going to be talking a lot of stuff related to concealed carry, carrying a weapon, and then police interactions, how that's viewed in the context of self-defense, both by a police officer and from his experience and from an attorney. So we're going to be going through all that tonight. We have a lot of questions. Members were able to submit questions beforehand. If you've got some other stuff, some other things you want to talk about, if you just want to say, hey, from Texas, hey, from Michigan, from wherever you are, please just leave your comment in the chat. Some questions in the chat we may or may not be able to get to. It's just all a matter of kind of the timing, but feel free to post there. We'll get to them if we can. We're definitely going to get to the questions submitted previously by members. But it's going to be a fun and exciting night. Again, it's just going to be a casual conversation here, and hopefully we'll learn a lot and enjoy it. So tonight we've got Ariana in the top left. She's going to be helping us with some of the Q&A later, just kind of walking through some of those great questions submitted by our members. I'm Plenty Gale, so I kind of work with the marketing over at Firearms Legal Protection, do a lot of stuff there. And then tonight, we're also joined by Ethical Preparedness. So he's got a lot of great experience. He's got a YouTube channel that talks about a lot of things, both from a police officer's perspective and some things related to just preparedness, survival skills, things like that. He'll tell you about himself and his channel a little bit more in a second. And then we are joined by Mr. Terry Johnson, who runs our whole legal department. I'm sure you guys are very familiar with Terry. You've seen his stuff before. He's Senior Vice President of Legal Operations, and he will give our attorney's perspective on everything tonight. So with that, Terry, let's take it away.
Plenty, Ariana, thank you. Always great to see you guys, and hope things are great down in Texas. But tonight, it's my pleasure to introduce our friend, Ethical Preparedness. EP, is it okay if I just call you EP for short?
That sounds perfect.
All right. EP, we want to know who you are and what is Ethical Preparedness, and talk about your YouTube channel. And I can't wait to have this discussion about, what a police officer thinks and what an attorney thinks. And so I'm going to kick it over to you.
Yeah, and this is going to be interesting. A police officer and an attorney having this conversation, so I'm really excited about it. So a little bit about myself and my background. Again, I had the emergency preparedness channel called Ethical Preparedness, and again, my YouTube channel, Ethical Preparedness, really focuses on emergency preparedness, and then also a lot of stuff on self-defense, because besides being long-time interest in emergency preparedness, I've also been a police officer for the past 20 years. Now, 13 of those 20 years, I was a detective, so I investigated a lot of violent crimes and stuff like that. Now, just about 5 months ago, I did leave the police department. Now, I am still considered law enforcement, but I'm no longer your typical police officer running around. So I'm kind of a higher level investigator, I guess, for lack of better terms. So I've also been a firearms instructor now for about 13 years, and I'm certified to teach firearms through my state's police academy. So I am certified to teach other police officers how to shoot and when to shoot. Not just how to shoot, but also when to shoot. And then one of the things that I hesitated talking about this originally, but about 2 years ago, I was involved in a self-defense police action shooting, and I was hesitant to talk about that in the public square because that's, getting involved in something like that is not something that is really fun to talk about to begin with. But the things that I learned, the things that I experienced, both mentally and physically what that event did to me is something that a self-defender is going to experience if he gets into he or she gets into a self-defense shooting on the street.
Let me ask you this, Jared, EP. So, do you see a difference between what you as a police officer would encounter versus a typical civilian? I mean, is there a different level of treatment?
I think it's really going to depend on where you are at as a citizen in this country to what that difference is going to be. You get in some areas of the country where they are anti-gun and where the average person might view a citizen that carries a gun for self-defense as a vigilante type, compared to you get other areas of the country where good guys with guns are very much liked. So like in my area, and especially the area that I worked at as a police officer, we liked good guys with guns. And it did not hurt our feelings anytime that a good guy protected himself from a bad guy. So that, to answer that question, it's going to vary from area to area to how that person is treated by law enforcement in that area. Did I make that clear?
Sure you did. But here's the bigger question. There are even some places, as you all know, across the country, even where law enforcement, let's say you're visiting Illinois or New York or some other state, potentially California. You're just visiting, you're off duty, you're armed, and something happens. Do you see that as a little bit different for you?
Yeah, and the reason why I think there would be some difference there. So if, let's say I'm in a different state and I get involved in a shooting, and when those police arrive to the scene, of course, I'm going to do what I would normally do after a self-defense shooting. And then I would also say, hey, look, I'm a police officer or was a police officer. Now I'm an investigator from the state that I'm in. And so I think a general thing there would be for those law enforcement officers to say, okay, this guy's been through training, this guy's done this guy's done that. And I think that's where some of your different treatment would come in.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, you talk about what to do after a shooting, and that is a topic that's out here that is absolutely huge. Everybody has a different way of looking at it. Now, obviously, as a police officer arriving on the scene, you kind of want some basic details. I mean, who are you? Things along those lines. But I can tell you, as an attorney, a criminal defense attorney, I want my client or potential client to shut up, because again, the more that they open their mouth, the more opportunity there is for failure or to put you so far behind the eight ball because, it's just some of the things we've seen. So in your view, what do you look for as a police officer, when you show up on a scene for someone who's defended themselves?
So as a police officer arriving to a scene where somebody has, as a police officer, when I arrive to the scene, I don't know what happened. So what I'm trying to figure out at that scene was, did a crime occur or did a crime not occur? So
what do you mean by that?
Well, if I show up to a scene and there's a dead body, was it a justified shooting or was it a homicide?
Okay. Now here's a question, because a lot of people seem to believe that it starts and stops with the police. And realistically, I'd say just about every jurisdiction, the police have to do a report. And that report is generally, it goes up the channel, it's escalated up to the prosecutor. And the prosecutor actually makes that call whether something's justified or not. Would you agree with that?
Exactly, yes.
So I want to go back to what you were saying. You're there to see, tell me what you look for when you get to a scene.
evidence, the different types of evidence, and that would just vary upon scene to scene. But on a self-defense shooting, obviously, the first thing you're going to be looking for is the firearm that was used, the spent casings, blood spatter, witnesses, video surveillance. And of course, that's going to vary from scene to scene and what kind of evidence you're going to get. Did this take place in a parking lot or in somebody's backyard? You know, it takes place in a parking lot, grocery store parking lot. You're going to have video surveillance. You might have witnesses. But it happens in somebody's backyard, you might, you know, have just the self-defender and then the wounded or deceased bad guy. You are exactly right. The prosecutor, and in some areas they're called DAs or district attorneys, but in a lot of areas they're called prosecutors or deputy prosecutors. You have the elected prosecutor and then his deputy prosecutors underneath them. And they ultimately, so the police's job is to get as many statements as they can, collect as much evidence as they can, and be able to try to tell that story to the prosecutor. And I've seen in some cases where it depends on the jurisdiction how many dead bodies they have there, or how many homicides or killings justified or criminal homicides. But you get in some counties where there's not a murder every day, and you'll actually have the prosecutor show up at that scene, at that homicide scene. That way the police are able to relay information to that prosecutor at that scene. And then even usually in your larger cities, when they have a homicide or, you know, so when I say homicide, it can be either criminal homicide or justified homicide.
Sure.
When they have a homicide scene, it's pretty common for the detectives, the investigators, to call the prosecutor and give over the phone, hey, this is what we got.
Right. What do you as a police officer expect from someone who's just used lethal force to protect themselves? I mean, do you expect them to make a statement? I mean, as a police officer now, not as a someone that's a firearms instructor and has the skill set and knowledge that you have, you know, with your channel, Ethical Preparedness. But as a police officer, what would you like to see as you arrive?
So if I was your typical police officer with no experience in this realm and how self-defense shootings affect people, if I was your average cop showing up at a scene, I have a crime scene with a dead body in it. So I have a serious scene. And I am going to have to recreate that scene as best as I possibly can. So I'm going to want to get all the statements I can. I'm going to want to get all the evidence that I possibly can. I'm going to call crime scene out to take blood swabs, and not even just showing that there's blood there, but testing whose blood that is. So I'm going to be looking for the whole 9 yards because I am going to have to recreate that crime scene. Now, I want to kind of clarify here. When you shoot somebody, when a person justifiably and legally shoots a bad guy in self-defense, that is a crime scene. Not because that self-defender shot that bad guy, but when that bad guy committed that assault against that self-defender, that bad guy created that crime scene that he happens to be lying dead or wounded in now, if that makes sense. So as a police officer, I'm looking for statements from witnesses, every little bit of evidence that I can possibly get, because that is a serious crime scene that's going to have to be completely reconstructed. And what we're looking for is that evidence bolsters or corroborates, maybe bolsters not the right word, but corroborates any statements that are given to us.
So what do you expect from the person who is the self-defender? So as an ordinary police officer who is not, doesn't have the knowledge and expertise that you have as, the ethical preparedness.
So before
would you want to make a statement?
before all of this, I would ask, I want to know what happened right there at that scene from A to Z. I would have asked, I want to know, and that's exactly what even happened to me 2 years ago. Every cop that showed up and me as another police officer that just got on the radio saying, "Shots fired, start medics, I need help."
Right.
Every cop that showed up, what happened, and so this is something that is kind of starting to go across the nation slowly to police departments, which is, you get involved in a self-defense shooting, you need to, I think what we teach as police officers is you say this much, but not this much. And I think it sounded like what you said a minute ago is you don't want them saying nothing at all.
Yeah, and the reason behind that, I mean, you've been at scenes where, the adrenaline's running, something's just happened, and there's two ways, in my opinion, to get adrenaline out of you. You either run it out or exercise it out, or you open your mouth and you just let it all flow out. And basically, people that have just, used a lethal weapon to defend themselves, they're not going to be there doing, push-ups and jumping jacks when the police arrive. So the alternative is, say, I got to tell you what happened. And let me ask you, what have you seen in situations like this from people who've had to defend themselves? When they start making a statement, are they accurate? Are they, point on? Do people make a lot of mistakes? What have you seen?
So let me clarify this. I have never investigated a scene where a person has actually shot another person in self-defense. I have investigated where people have drawn their weapons, but I've not. While I've investigated death scenes, it's not been self-defense shootings. So I kind of want to clarify that. As far as my investigations that I've done where people have drawn their weapons, yes, they're very excited. And I'm sorry, I got off on the, hey, I need to make sure I clarify this. What was your original question again?
No, I'm sorry. So the question is, what do you normally, they make these statements. I mean, are they generally on point? Do they have to come back and correct them later? I mean, any scene that you've been at, even if it's not, like you said, it's still an adrenaline rush if you have to pull your firearm out and point it at someone, They
almost always have to come back and correct themselves, or they'll forget things just because that adrenaline is up. So, yeah, by no means is a detailed statement anything to be given right after a self-defense shooting.
Yeah, that's the funny part. You would think under most circumstances, I'm going to give you all the details right now before I forget. But when you've been involved in a situation where you've had to use, or now even in what you're saying, produce, a deadly weapon to protect yourself, that's a little different because, we were talking the other day, some departments, even if you use lethal force, they allow you sleep cycles, Tell me, when you're shooting, did you get that as well?
Yeah, I tried to get pressured into not doing that just because they just wanted the investigation to move quickly. And so there was some what's the word I'm looking for? Impatience there. And so I had one superior that was like, you got nothing to worry about. The dude pointed a gun at you. You were 100% justified. Just go in there and give your statement, And I was like, no, I will give it with my attorney by my side, and after I've had at least 2 nights of sleep.
Right.
I was not worried about criminal prosecution. What I was worried, or I don't want to say worried, but my concern was that before that, I would have still too many lapses of memory. I would still have memories that were out of sequence. And I could say something that was innocent, but that could be misconstrued later in court, in civil court or something like that.
Oh, absolutely. And that's the other thing. A lot of people, you never get a second chance to make a first statement. I used to ask people in court who, they made a statement at one point and then they came back and made another one, whether it was days or weeks later. And the question that, prosecutors would ask is, which version of the truth do you want us to believe? The one you gave on this date or the one you gave on this date?
Yeah.
And that puts, offenders or anyone in a very trick bag because, hey, yep, I remembered, 2 days later. But the question is, did you remember after someone talked to you? It's, getting your attorney involved right away is a huge asset.
And I remember when I went in to give that detailed statement, and I met up with my attorney right before doing it, and he said, hey, let's go over with what you're going to tell the because it was an outside police agency that investigated. Obviously, nobody in my police agency is going to investigate my shooting. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it was an outside agency that investigated the shooting. And so he said, let's go over it. And so as I was talking to him and going over it, he said, hey, let's word it this way. It's the exact same thing. You're saying the same exact thing, same thing. This is the truth. Let's word it this way, because if you say this can be misconstrued,
Absolutely. Now, on your channel, you talk about a couple of things that you advise people to do after if they're involved in a self-defense incident. And some, I've heard this from some folks about requesting to go to the hospital. Why do you suggest that?
Well, as somebody that's been involved in a self-defense police action shooting, the amount of stress and adrenaline that goes through your body, you first of all, with all that adrenaline in your body that you have at that time, you could have injuries you don't even know about to start. Second of all, with your blood pressure and your heartbeat going through the roof like that for hours, you could be 15 minutes away from a heart attack, an hour away from a heart attack. Luckily, I'm 49 now. I'm getting up there.
You look good for 49.
Thanks. I was 47 at the time of the shooting. Luckily, I don't eat Taco Bell every night for dinner, and I do go out and get a little bit of exercise. But you know what? I honestly think that if I was 5-10 years older and had a few more Big Macs for dinners, I could have went into a heart attack. My adrenaline was that high afterwards. And it seemed like afterwards, the adrenaline, as everything sank in that happened, the adrenaline got worse. As it really sank in, what happened as your brain started processing it, actually the adrenaline and the stress was, because at the time when it was all going down, you just reacted. Not perfectly, but you reacted. Then after it was over with and you started seeing the blood and all the other squad cars started showing up and people running and screaming and ambulances and stuff, and it really started sinking down that you were just forced to point your gun at somebody and pull the trigger, and now you've seen all this blood coming out of this person, and you caused that. You were forced to cause it, but you still caused it. Now, as a police officer, I got into law enforcement to help people. I mean, I love people. I want to help people. I want to protect people. I never, ever want to shoot somebody, and I was forced to that day. But so one of the reasons I suggest about going to or several different reasons I suggest that people request to go to the hospital is, again, with your adrenaline so high, you could have injuries that you don't know about. You could be 15 minutes or an hour away from a heart attack that you don't know about. Number two is that is a high stress scene. That scene right there is a high stress scene. Going back to the police department is not going to help either, because not like you're going to be taken to a comfortable couch. I mean, it's
probably you guys don't have those in your area, huh? When you get arrested, the big couches, the big screen TVs, the coffee maker over on the side.
Yeah. But again, going to the hospital, I think, is very important that to be checked because you could have injuries that you don't even know, that you don't even feel.
Sure.
Also, too, you could be minutes, an hour away from a heart attack, and because these situations can be extremely stressful. It's hard to explain it unless you've been in it, unless you've been involved in it. There's just no way you can comprehend it unless you've actually been involved in it.
And
then the other thing too is it gets that self-defender away from that stressful scene and gets him into a more calm and sterile environment. So there's multiple factors there that
sure.
I think it's a good, I'm never going to tell anybody that they have to do that, but I think it's a good idea to say, you know what, and I want to go to the hospital.
And I would just advise, be careful with that, because again, you make some statements even there, to your doctor or other things. Those statements can actually be used against you, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And even though, I've had to visit some clients that have been in the hospital at the time, and you're not alone. Generally, you are, there's an officer there with you. So it's not like your family and friends can come visit and,
at the police department, my wife couldn't even come to the police department to see me when I got taken back to the police department after the shooting. So, and I think it's something that we should clarify is that until that initial investigation is over with, a person is detained and not arrested. Typically. All right. So let's say I got dispatched to a shooting scene. Somebody called shots fired, or what have you. We get there. There's a person lying dead on the ground. There's a person that's it's whatever evidence is showing us that this person was the shooter. We're going to detain that person and start investigating what occurred, because if all evidence points to that being a justified self-defense shooting, we cannot make the arrest. If we automatically make that arrest, when I say arrest, I'm talking like he is taken to jail, not to the police station, but taken to jail, photographed, booked in, charges formally filed. If we make a bad arrest, we as the police officer get open up to a tort claim for a false arrest lawsuit.
Sure.
So,
that depends on obviously the jurisdiction you're in, because some states have immunities against that. Depending upon what state and things you're in, they give those officers and prosecutors immunity from if you're arrested. It's really got to be malicious for all practical purposes before you can move it forward. But you do make a good point there, and the other part of that people really need to understand. Let me ask this: have you ever had anybody just blurt something out? I mean, because a lot of people are under the misconception that, hey, my rights weren't read to me. They never read me my rights. I mean,
we call those excited utterances.
Yeah, and can they be used against you?
Oh, most definitely, yeah.
And do you hear a lot of those when you're, again, people want to tell their side of the story?
Yeah, we do. I mean, so in the, I could kind of got to back up here. So like when I've done investigations where people have drawn their weapon in self-defense or displayed their weapon in self-defense, whether it was physically draw it out or just display it, which is still considered the same, minus the pointing of a firearm. In those cases there, we generally will, like when I've investigated them, it's like, hey, tell me everything that happened, because I've not been afraid to do that or had concern with asking, at least getting a general idea of what occurred at that scene. Because since that person didn't physically shoot somebody, more than likely, he or she's adrenaline's not going to be completely through the roof. They should be able to give me a pretty good idea of what happened, so I can pretty much make a pretty good decision if a crime actually occurred or not. Now I know you as a defense attorney, you're gonna be like, oh no. I would tell my client.
There's
But
never.
me as a police officer, I want to know if a crime occurred or not.
But
You know?
while I appreciate and respect that, you as the police officer are really not the one that ultimately makes that decision. That goes up to a prosecutor. And,
Well, okay, yeah.
whether a crime has been
back that up for a second. When I want to know if a crime occurred or not, then that starts telling me that starts kind of deciphering that evidence that I found, that I'm finding at that scene.
Well, yeah, I agree with that, but keep
And
this
then,
in mind.
and then I can pass that information on to and I can give the prosecutor a more clear picture of that happened.
Right, but here's the thing. The way our system is set up, if you come to a scene and you make a determination, there's someone outside of the police department that makes that determination whether a crime has been committed or not, whether probable cause exists to move it forward or not. So, while I appreciate exactly what you're saying, as you even started out, I want to know what happened. That's part of your job as a police officer. You want to know. And, I always have advised any client, listen, the police are not bad people, but you're in a different position all of a sudden because you are now being looked at as someone who may have committed a crime, even though in your mind, everything could be 100% justified. However, one wrong word, one wrong phrase, the police officer writes something down wrong. It ends up going to the prosecutor and they say, oh, no, even though the police said nothing's here, I am going to charge them with this crime. So that's just why I tell people, as much as you think you're going to talk your way out of something, you actually start talking your way deeper into it. So
my big concern on that, the more they talk, the more a civil attorney down the road is going, oh man, we got this. Because criminal court, we have to have probable cause to make the arrest. The prosecutor wants us to have beyond a reasonable doubt, because that's what he has to have in court to win it in trial. But civil court, preponderance of evidence, 51% proof, more likely than not they did this. So a lot lower burden of proof in civil court than criminal court.
Absolutely.
To kind of clarify what we talked about a second ago, my job as a police officer at the scene is to get as much information as I can, because I am presenting, as the police officer, or especially as the investigator or the detective, I present those findings to the prosecutor. And so the more clear of a picture that I can paint for that prosecutor is what decides if that self-defender goes home that night or not.
Oh, I agree. Well, we're having a great discussion. I do want to get into it a little bit more, but Ariana, I know there's some questions that are out there that I'm sure a lot of our audience members are just, trying to kick the doors in the ass. So why don't we turn this back to you and let you kind of move us in that direction? And your mic is off. You're muted.
Okay. I press unmute and then I guess I muted back on. But we do have a lot of questions tonight, so definitely let's get started on that. It might be over some things you guys have already talked about, but you guys can briefly just clarify on something and then we can move on to the next question. But we'll get started tonight with an ethical preparedness question. Raymond, I'll pop it up right here. Raymond asked, can you please clarify on what you mean by ethical preparedness?
Oh, my channel name behind ethical preparedness. So being a long-time person that's been interested in emergency preparedness, I guess, prepper, before I started my channel, I would watch a lot of YouTube videos and read a lot of magazine articles, and just some of the stuff that I would see people post, or the videos that would be done, or people that would comment underneath videos. I just seen a lot of, people that would would talk about how they would do questionable things. And my thing is, I'm big into ethics. When I first became a police officer, we were taught the pillars of being in a good society, and ethics were really hammered into us and stuff like that. So I'm really big into ethics. I'm really big into being transparent. And hey, I work for the government. You got to be, my belief is that government has to be super transparent. Governments don't always do that, but that's my belief anyways. And I just always been into being the good guy. So I decided that when I started doing my channel that I would call it Ethical Preparedness. And a lot of it was that, hey, this is being prepared for emergencies and disasters and stuff, but more from an ethical standpoint, more from the standpoint of being a good guy.
Great.
That's awesome. So the next question is going to be Sharon's question. If someone breaks into your home, should you tell them you have a weapon?
That's a great question, Sharon. Thank you. I'll give you my 2 cents. If someone breaks into your home, let them get what they came looking for. In other words, I wouldn't give them any knowledge of what I have, what I don't have. If I've got dogs, let the dogs go. If I've got a shotgun, let the shotgun do what it does. You have no legal obligation, to my knowledge, in most states, that you have to advise somebody in your home that you have a weapon, simply because they're already committing a criminal act by breaking into your home. So therefore, you don't owe that person anything. It's my 2 cents. What do you think, EP?
Well, so I think you brought up something there. What is that person's state's? What is her name was Sharon, yes. What is the state that Sharon lives in, the state in this union, what is her state's laws on self-defense? Does she have a duty to retreat in her state, even in her home? That I don't know. So my suggestion for her would be, the first thing is learn your state's self-defense laws, to let them know if you have some kind of a duty to retreat, or something where you're supposed to de-escalate first or not. The other thing too, for me personally, if somebody starts breaking into my house or has just made entry into my house, there'll probably be some people in the comment section that might give me some pushback on this. If I can keep from shooting somebody, I will. So if somebody breaks into my house, if I can point my firearm, if I can do this without getting myself killed, if I can point my firearm at them and say, leave, I would prefer that to happen rather than shooting them, because I just don't think people appreciate or understand the psychological effect that pointing a gun at another person, another human being, and pulling that trigger can do to you. I would much prefer that route to happen. So, but to kind of go back to her question is, does she have to give warning that she has a weapon before she can shoot a burglar? What does her state law say on that? Does she have to? Now, most states that have the castle doctrine don't state that you have to give warning first before you can shoot a burglar in self-defense. Most states say, in essence, hey, that burglar that's broke into your house, he is not there to bake you a birthday cake. He's there to harm you, and therefore you can use deadly force to protect yourself.
Awesome. Great input, guys. This next question kind of goes a little bit onto what you're talking about de-escalating. But Long's question is, do I have to de-escalate if alleged criminal just dashed straight at me on a counter like property trespassing?
Well, again, when we say de-escalate, again, there's a couple words in there. Alleged criminal just dashes straight at me. Obviously, I would need a few more details there, but let me just kind of throw this out. If you can de-escalate, and this kind of goes back to what EP was saying a couple of moments ago, you can de-escalate something, by all means do that. Okay. Your firearm is a tool of last resort. I believe on just about every one of these webinars, some way, somehow, I have said that your firearm is a tool of last resort. And if you can de-escalate, by all means, de-escalate. If you can, if you don't have to use it, don't use it. That's pretty much the best answer I can give you there. If you can de-escalate, by all means, de-escalate.
And my suggestion for Long is, again, look up your state's laws on self-defense. De-escalation, is he also in? So this, I can't clarify his question, but is he talking about de-escalation? Is retreating as part of de-escalation? I'm kind of curious if that's what he's kind of asking in that. One of the things I would have to say is if somebody is charging at you, de-escalation's probably out the window. You know what I mean? When they're physically charging you at that point, de-escalation's probably gone. That because it takes two people to de-escalate. That's something that a lot of people don't, when they talk about, oh, police need more training in de-escalation techniques. They have to remember that it takes both parties have to take part of that de-escalation for it to de-escalate. So somebody's charging at me in my state, I don't have to. In my state, we have Castle Doctrine. We also have standard ground law. So I am not required to de-escalate or to try to retreat. I am just legally allowed to protect myself as long as it's within reasonable means. But I always suggest, if you can, try to de-escalate. Whether you're legally required to or not, if you can de-escalate, you want to, because in court, and I'm sure Terry can back me up on this, the aggressor is usually the one that ends up in trouble legally. And the more that you can show that you are not the aggressor, that you did not want to be part of that physical combat or that altercation, the better it looks for you.
Well
Great.
said.
Yeah. All right. So Leroy's question: define circumstances when a firearm can be unholstered and self-defense. Some examples: backing away from escalation. What steps could be taken if you unholster and present a firearm to escape a situation?
EP, you want to go first on this?
Yeah. So you know what, Leroy, that is an excellent question, because man, it starts really getting into a gray line there of when it's usually in most areas legally justified to pull your weapon out and point it at somebody to actually pulling that trigger. So and I'll have to stop and kind of articulate this first. Again, learn your state's laws on self-defense. Or do you have a duty to retreat in your state, or do you have a stand your ground law? And anybody that's watching this, my homework to you is learn your state's self-defense laws. And I think one of the things that you'll see when you read if you live in a state that actually says, that actually has good, strong self-defense laws, I think you will see that most states' laws regarding self-defense will use this one word over and over again, and that is the word reasonable. So for you to be able to draw your weapon, unholster it in a self-defense situation, you're going to have to be able to articulate that it was reasonable for you to do so, that if you didn't do so, that within mere seconds later, it was going to turn into a situation where you was probably going to actually have to use deadly force. I don't remember the exact statistics, but I've kind of seen it before. There's the number of people that use a firearm just by pointing it, justifiably pointing it, and that scares away the intruder, or that scares away the attacker, compared to the amount of people that actually have to end up shooting their attackers. It's the numbers are huge difference. And again, I don't know what those numbers are. So to be able to, when it would be justifiable to unholster your weapon is, again, you would need to be able to reasonably articulate that it was mere moments away of turning into a deadly force situation. The other thing too is, so let's kind of use some examples here. If a guy is charging at me with a knife and he's within so many feet of me, he's going to reach me within seconds. That would obviously be in most states that have strong self-defense laws, you could pull your weapon and even use deadly force to keep him from reaching you with that knife. What kind of weapon does he have? Is he holding a knife, but he's not advancing on you and he's 20 feet away? That would be, I think, would be a good example in most states where you could at least unholster your weapon and have it at the ready and give your voice commands to keep him from beginning that charge. But let's say that a person is 30 feet away from you and they have a knife in their hand and they're not charging you yet, but they're saying they're going to come slice your throat or what have you. Again, where, like I said earlier, in most areas, that's where it'd be justified to pull your weapon out, give voice commands. But you now change that to a gun. Well, that gun can reach that 30 feet within, split second. So there'd be there's just a lot of different situations there.
You've got a lot of information there, but I want to make sure people understand one thing. Even when you present that firearm, you got to remember again to, as you've said quite a bit, EP, know your state laws. In some places, that would be considered aggravated use of a weapon. So again, you have to be very careful anytime you use a weapon to defend yourself, because even in that type of situation where you pulled your firearm out and, someone's gone away, if they've contacted the police before you, potentially, their story, I promise you, is going to be a lot different than the story you may want to tell the police. So keep in mind, again, where you are. In some states, there are laws on the books that say you can do that. Other states, again, it becomes like here in Michigan, we call that potentially felony firearm, which is a mandatory 2 years in prison consecutive to any other crime or charge that you may be found guilty of. So, Ariana, what else you got for us?
All right. So you guys kind of answered some of the other questions that I was going to go on, but let's do this question. Michael's question is there a distance from an attacker is too far away from you to call your action self-defense?
Typical attorney answer. It depends, right? it depends on
the weapon.
Yeah. Does the attacker have a knife? Does he have a pen? Does he have a gun? What are the other circumstances? I can be if I have a 85-year-old woman, with a walker that's 8 feet away from me and she's got a knife, that's a lot different than a 25-year-old man that has let's say a bottle that he's, broken open. He's coming at me and he's, 15 feet away. So again, it all depends upon the totality of the circumstances and your actions as well.
I think another thing too is what is the actions of that person at that distance? Are they standing still and threatening you from 30 feet away, or are they charging you with a knife in their hand and now they've reached 30 feet away? That's going to be a huge difference there, because somebody standing 30 feet away and holding a knife and saying, I'm going to come cut you, is a big difference than a guy that's charging at me and he's now within 30 feet of me with that knife as he's charging. That's a night and day difference.
Absolutely. And let me take a quick moment. We've talked about a couple of things here, and I just want to, we're going to take a few more questions before we wrap up. We like to keep this right around an hour, but, I want to say that it's been a great pleasure for me to work for a company like Firearms Legal Protection that truly looks to protect its members. And, this has been mentioned several times by EP. One thing that a lot of people don't talk about is the civil side of this as well, because, you get through the criminal side, there could be a civil attorney or a civil lawsuit potentially on the other side where that's going to cost you tons of money. One great thing about Firearms Legal Protection, even with our bare basic individual plan, and that's the plan that covers you with uncapped attorney's fees, both in, in your home state, both for criminally and civil. And those civil attorneys, those things can rack up pretty high. So that's something you want to keep in mind. Again, as you see on the screen here, individual basic covers you in your home state. And now it also gives you the access to my FLP app. And, if you have the individual premium, whether you are in a great state like Michigan and I decide to travel and visit Ariana and Plenty in Texas, I'm covered under the individual plan. I get bail bond. I get everything that we offer, bail bond up to $250,000, lost wages, incident scene cleanup, when EP talks about somebody going into the home, somebody's got to clean that up. And I bet it's not going to be the police department who does that. So we send a crew out to handle that. And also there is a family plan in there that covers you and your entire family across, all 50 states. And that family plan is for you, your significant other, husband, wife, and any minor children. So there's a link in the description. Click on it. We cover you. We appreciate all our members. And, we also continue to bring things along these lines, of great education. And just want to say thank you. I want to take a couple of more questions before I turn it back to, Plenty for the closeout here. So, Ariana, how about one or two more questions?
Okay, this one's kind of an FLP question, but if we don't get a chance to call in case of an altercation, do we even get a chance to call FLP?
So that's a great question. If you don't get a chance to call, and I'm assuming you're talking about, the police show up and they take your phone, which is more than likely going to happen because, again, they're going to separate you from everything. Am I right, EP? Mm-hmm. And he's nodding yes. Once you're separated, at some point, and I'm stressing if you get a phone call, that's the time that you should call your FLP emergency hotline and have an attorney pick up and give us the information, and we'll dispatch an attorney out to you no matter where you are.
Great. Let's pull this question up. Benjamin's question is, if you're in an obvious self-defense situation, you have used a firearm, they always confiscate it? For how long? And if so, is this what they do in every state? You guys kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but if you can touch on it again, that'd be great.
Can I answer this?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anytime there is a shooting, that is a crime scene. And so that gun is going to become evidence. So that gun I cannot think of a time that a gun used in a shooting will not be confiscated as evidence until that investigation is over with. As far as the amount of time that could take, that's really going to vary on a lot of different factors. How clear cut is that self-defense shooting? Or how muddied are the legal waters in that self-defense shooting? And the reason why that gun does get confiscated is it is not unusual for more information to come forward at a later time that maybe changes that story of what occurred. So until that investigation is over with, that gun is held as evidence. And then even beyond that, that gun gets held as evidence until the prosecutor makes his formal decision that he's not going to file charges. Then also, then beyond that, how long it can take for you to get your gun back can also depend on that city. So if you have a smaller, more pro-gun area, you'll probably get your gun back quicker. You live in a larger city where they're more anti-gun. From what I've kind of seen, is they can do red tape and bureaucracy, and they can drag that out. I knew of a cop that got involved in a self-defense shooting off duty, and his gun was kept for a year and a half, and he was an off-duty sworn police officer off duty with his own pistol that got involved.
I got one better for you. I've got a friend here who was on duty. He was from a different jurisdiction, and something happened, and the local police department got his gun, and again, on duty, and they kept it, and he has since retired. It's been about 19, 20 years now, and still hasn't gotten the firearm back. But don't get caught up, Benjamin, in the point of obvious self-defense. As EP has mentioned on several occasions, just because it's obvious to you doesn't mean it's obvious to the police. Everything the police and prosecutors don't know at the time. So the great thing, if you're an FLP member, if your firearm is taken and you don't get it back within a year, FLP is going to basically give you a firearms confiscation payment up to $1,000, so you don't have to walk around without a firearm to protect yourself. How about one last question, Ariana?
Okay, well, there's a couple left, but let's just do this one. So Michael's question is on ammunition choice. So does ammunition choice, his is Spear Gold Dot, G1 or G2, affect how you might be prosecuted or judged?
EP, I'll let you start and I'll finish up.
You know what? So there's a good saying that I like, and Terry, you'll probably appreciate this too. It's called shock the conscience. And as long as you're not doing anything, carrying anything, something like that would shock the conscience, I think you will be fine if you do a legal self-defense shooting with, using hollow points or something like that. Typically, what I have found is what the courts care about was that shooting justified? Not what you shot him with. Was it justified for you to shoot him? The court typically is not going to care if you shot the bad guy, ran over him with a car, hit him over the head with grandma's big, thick glass ashtrays like we used to see as a kid, caved his head in with a brick. Was it justified for you to use lethal force against that bad guy? Now, where it would get into shock the conscience is if you shoot him with a bullet so big and bad, it blows him completely in half and kills 10 people behind him. So that's kind of my thoughts on that is, as long as you're not shocking the conscience, as long as what you're using is readily bought off the store shelves and doesn't have inscriptions of kill everybody on that bullet casing or something like that, I don't see where that's going to affect you negatively in court when it's a legal and justified self-defense shooting. Terry, what's your thoughts?
And I would pretty much agree with that. Whether I shoot someone with a 357 Magnum or a 22, the mere fact is that this person is dead. I've never yet seen a case in all my years of practice where someone has said, well, he used a 9mm. He should have used a 380. They really do not get into that, as EP mentioned. So, Michael, thank you very much. And with that, we're almost out of time. I'm going to turn it back to Plenty and Ariana, but I want to say, EP, thanks for joining us tonight. It's been a pleasure. Ethical Preparedness is his YouTube channel. Make sure you folks go and, see more about ethical preparedness. So, Ariana, Plenty, back to you.
Thanks, Terry.
All right, thank you. So I hope everybody enjoyed this. This was a really fun and interesting talk. As you saw, putting an experienced police officer and an experienced attorney together, there are some things that we can say, yep, this is how it is, but there's also a lot of gray area there too. And so that's why it's so important to have legal protection, both in court for criminal cases, but also for the civil cases that may come up after the fact. So really important to have firearms legal protection. I know a lot of people who are watching this are already members, so thank you. You understand the value of being protected. If you're not yet a member, make a point to check out that description down below this video. So it'll be right down here in the bottom bar in the comments. Check that out. There's a link in there and clicking that link will give you a discounted rate on signing up because you signed up for this video. Also, if you've watched some of these webinars, some of these live streams with us before, we've got a short survey in there. If you'll fill that out, we'd really appreciate that, just because that helps us just to know what content you like. We've got all kinds of ideas of what we want the next one to be, but knowing what you like will help bump that to the top of the list and will make us a little bit more incentivized to produce content that you want to see. So I hope you enjoyed this one. I hope you learned a lot. Until next time, remember, firearms legal protection. You protect yourself, we'll protect you.